On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 experienced hikers did something almost impossible. They cut their own tent open from the inside, ran barefoot into the freezing darkness, and never came back. When rescuers finally found their bodies, nothing made sense. Some had crushed ribs. One had a fractured skull. One was missing her tongue. Several had almost no clothing despite temperatures below -30 degrees Celsius. And the strangest part, there were no signs that anyone had chased them. No unknown footprints around the tent. No evidence of a fight. No clear sign of an animal attack. No obvious avalanche debris. Just one torn tent on a frozen mountainside, and 9 dead hikers scattered across the snow. More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in modern history. But the mystery did not begin with the bodies. It began with silence. The group was supposed to return from their expedition in mid-February. When they did not arrive, at first, there was no panic. In the Soviet Union, in the winter of 1959, delays were not unusual. The mountains were remote. The weather was brutal. Communication was limited. But days passed. Then more days. And slowly, concern turned into fear. A search party was organized. Students, soldiers, local guides, aircraft crews, all began looking for a group that should have been easy to recognize. They were young. They were strong. They were experienced. They had skis, food, equipment, cameras, diaries, maps, and a clear route. They were not amateurs wandering into the wilderness. They were trained hikers attempting a difficult winter expedition through the northern Ural Mountains. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov. Calm, methodical, technically skilled. The kind of person others trusted in dangerous conditions. The group around him was made up mostly of students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. They were not famous. They were not reckless thrill seekers. They were ordinary young Soviet adventurers doing what thousands of young people did at the time, testing themselves against the wilderness. There were 10 of them at first, but one member, Yuri Yudin, became ill early in the journey. His joints hurt. His body could not continue, so he turned back. It saved his life. He would spend the rest of it wondering why. The remaining 9 continued north. And from the photographs they left behind, nothing seems wrong. They smile in the snow. They joke with each other. They move through forests, rivers, and deep winter terrain. Their diary entries are ordinary. Cold weather, hard travel, small frustrations, moments of humor. There is no sense of fear, no warning, no feeling that they are being followed. And that is what makes the final scene so disturbing. Because at some point, this ordinary expedition turned into something else. The group reached the slope of a mountain known to the local Mansi people as Kholat Syakhl. The name is often translated as Dead Mountain, although that translation is sometimes debated. But after 1959, the name became impossible to ignore. The hikers pitched their tent on an exposed slope, not in the forest below, where there would have been shelter, not beside trees, where firewood was easy to find, but high on the mountainside in wind, darkness, and open snow. That decision has haunted investigators for decades. Why camp there? Some believe they were simply following their route and did not want to lose altitude. Others think worsening weather forced them to stop. Maybe visibility dropped. Maybe the wind became too strong. Maybe the group believed they could safely spend one night on the slope and continue the next morning. Whatever the reason, they dug into the snow, leveled a platform, and set up the tent. Inside were boots, warm clothes, food, equipment, a stove that had not been properly set up for use. Everything suggested they had settled in for the night. Then something happened. Something urgent enough to make them cut their way out, not calmly open the entrance. Cut from the inside. The rescuers found the tent weeks later. It was damaged, partly collapsed, partly covered with snow, and it had been sliced open from within. That single detail became the heart of the mystery, because cutting open your own tent in the middle of a freezing night is not just unusual. It is desperate. A tent is survival. In that environment, leaving without boots and coats could be a death sentence. And yet the footprints showed that the hikers did not scatter in blind panic. They moved away from the tent together, down the slope, toward the forest, step by step, some barefoot, some in socks, some wearing only light indoor clothing. The footprints were visible for hundreds of meters before the wind and snow erased them. There were no other tracks beside them. No strangers, no pursuers, no animals. Just the group leaving the only shelter they had. And then the footprints vanished. The first bodies were found near a large cedar tree at the edge of the forest. They were Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko. Both were barely clothed. Both were bared of hypothermia. Nearby were the remains of a small fire. Branches on the cedar tree had been broken several meters above the ground. Someone had climbed it, or tried to. That detail raises a quiet but chilling question. Were they climbing to look back at the tent? Were they trying to see through the darkness and snow? Were they watching for danger? Or were they simply trying to break branches for firewood with freezing hands? A little distance away, searchers found Igor Dyatlov. He was lying in the snow, facing the direction of the tent. Then they found Zinaida Komogorova. She too appeared to be moving back toward the tent. Later, Rustam Slobodin was found between them. He had a skull fracture, though investigators believed it was not necessarily enough by itself to kill him. These three seem to have tried to return. That matters, because it suggests the group did not abandon the tent forever. At least some of them wanted to go back. Maybe they waited in the forest for the danger to pass. Maybe they realized they could not survive without their clothes. Maybe they sent the strongest members up to retrieve equipment. But none of them made it. The cold stopped them first. Then came the second discovery, and everything became stranger. The remaining four were not found until May, when the snow began to melt. They were in a ravine, buried under several meters of snow. Their names were Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolovatov, and Nikolai Theboks, Brignol. These bodies changed the case forever, because they were not simply frozen. Theboks, Brignol had a severe skull injury. Dubinina had massive chest injuries, including broken ribs. Zolotaryov also had serious rib fractures. The injuries were described as powerful. Not like a simple fall. Not like ordinary hypothermia. Some reports compared the force to a car crash, but there were no deep external wounds matching the internal damage. No obvious signs of a brutal beating. No battlefield. No blood-soaked snow. Then there was Lyudmila Dubinina. Her tongue was missing. Parts of soft tissue around her mouth and eyes were also missing. This detail became one of the most repeated parts of the Dyatlov mystery. It has been used to suggest everything from torture to secret weapons to impossible forces. But the established facts are less sensational and more unsettling. Her body was found months later in flowing meltwater beneath deep snow. Soft tissue loss can happen after death through decomposition, water action, and scavenging. That explanation may be natural, but it did not stop the question from spreading. Why her? Why like that? And why did the injuries of the ravine group look so different from the others? The official Soviet investigation struggled to answer. The final conclusion was famously vague. The hikers had died because of an unknown compelling force. That phrase became legend. Not an avalanche, not murder, not exposure. An unknown compelling force. In a case already full of silence, that wording sounded almost like an admission. Something had happened out there, and even the investigators could not name it. But to understand the mystery, we have to separate what is known from what is imagined. The tent was cut from the inside. The group left without proper clothing. The footprints showed no unknown people approaching or leaving. Several died of hypothermia. Several had severe injuries. Some clothing later showed traces of radiation. The weather was dangerous. The location was remote. And the final hours were not directly witnessed by anyone. Everything else is interpretation. The first major suspicion was local conflict. The Mansi people lived in the region. Some early theories suggested the hikers may have entered sacred land or offended locals. But this theory quickly weakened. There were no signs of a fight. No Mansi tracks around the camp. No evidence of theft. The group's equipment and valuables were still there. Investigators found no convincing motive. And the Mansi were generally familiar with travelers passing through the area. The theory survived mostly because people needed a human enemy. But the evidence did not give them one. Then came the avalanche theory. At first glance, it seems obvious. A tent on a snowy slope. A sudden emergency. People fleeing downhill. Injuries caused by force. Death by cold. It sounds like the simplest answer. But the problem is that the scene did not look like a typical avalanche. The tent was still visible. It had not been swept far away. The slope did not appear steep enough for a major avalanche. Searchers did not report a huge debris field. The footprints were preserved for a distance. And none of the bodies were found buried right beside the tent, as classic avalanche victims might be. For decades, these objections made many people reject the avalanche explanation entirely. But later researchers asked a different question. What if it was not a massive avalanche? What if it was something smaller? Something quiet? Something local? Something just strong enough to make the hikers believe the tent was about to be buried. This is where the slab avalanche theory enters. A slab avalanche is not always a roaring wall of snow. David, it can be a compact plate of snow breaking loose and sliding over a weaker layer beneath it. The hikers had cut into the slope to make a flat platform for their tent. That action may have weakened the snowpack above them. Then wind may have loaded more snow onto the slope during the night. A delayed collapse could have sent a heavy slab into the tent hours after they went to sleep. Not enough to erase the entire campsite. Not enough to leave dramatic avalanche evidence weeks later. But enough to crush part of the tent. Enough to injure people lying inside. Enough to convince the group that staying there meant death. In 2021, researchers Johann Gaum and Alexander Puzrin published a scientific model showing how a small delayed slab avalanche could plausibly fit parts of the evidence. Their work did not claim to solve every detail, but it answered several long-standing objections. The slope may have been locally steeper than it appeared. the tent platform may have created instability. Katabatic winds may have loaded snow above the camp, and a smaller slab could cause serious injuries without leaving the obvious signs of a massive avalanche. This theory is one of the strongest modern explanations, but it still leaves questions. If several hikers were badly injured at the tent, how did they move all the way down to the forest? If the slab was small, why did everyone leave without boots? Why did no one return successfully? And why were the most seriously injured bodies found much farther away in the ravine? One possible answer is that the tragedy happened in stages. First, the group escapes the tent. Maybe some are injured. Maybe they believe another slide is coming. The entrance is blocked or too slow to use, so they cut their way out. Outside, visibility is terrible. The wind is brutal. They decide to move downhill to the tree line, where there is shelter and wood. This is not panic. This is survival. They descend together. At the cedar, they build a fire. Two of them remain near it. Some attempt to climb the tree, possibly to locate the tent. But the cold is overwhelming. Their clothes are not enough. Their hands stop working. Their minds begin to fail. Hypothermia does not feel like simply getting cold. It changes judgment. It slows thought. It creates confusion. Eventually, people can experience paradoxical undressing, where freezing victims remove clothing because their damaged nervous system creates a false sensation of heat. Some of the strange clothing patterns at Dyatlov Pass may be explained by this, but not all of them, because some clothing had been removed from dead bodies and used by others. That suggests the survivors were still thinking, still trying to adapt, still trying to live. After Doroshenko and Krivonischenko died near the fire, others may have taken pieces of their clothing. This is grim, but rational. The group was not acting like people destroyed by madness. They were fighting the cold with whatever they had. Then perhaps they split. 3 tried to return to the tent. 4 tried to build a better shelter in the ravine. A snow den, a last refuge. The ravine may have seemed safer than the exposed slope, but it may also have become a trap. The bodies there were found under deep snow. Some researchers suggest a snow shelter collapsed. If the 4 dug into snow above a stream, the roof could have given way. A fall into the ravine or collapse of snow and ice could explain severe chest and head injuries. This theory helps explain why the worst trauma was found in the ravine group, rather than at the tent. It also explains why they were buried so deeply. But again, it does not explain everything. Were there injuries from a slab avalanche near the tent? From a ravine collapse? From falling onto rocks hidden under snow? From pressure under meters of snow? The evidence allows several possibilities. It does not give one clean answer. Then there is the wind. Some investigators have proposed katabatic winds. These are powerful downhill winds caused by cold, dense air flowing from higher terrain. In extreme conditions, they can be sudden, violent, and disorienting. A katabatic wind could make the tent feel impossible to remain in. It could create unbearable noise. It could load snow onto the slope. It could reduce visibility so severely that the tent, once abandoned, became almost impossible to find again. This theory is not as cinematic as murder or weapons testing, but it has one important strength. It does not require outsiders. The mountain itself becomes the threat. Wind, snow, darkness, and human decision-making. A chain of small disasters. Each one survivable alone. Together fatal. Another theory is infrasound. This idea suggests that wind passing over the mountain created low-frequency sound waves capable of causing panic, nausea, or intense fear. It became popular because it seems to explain the most irrational act of all, leaving the tent. But the evidence is thin. Infrasound can affect people under some conditions, but proving it occurred that night is almost impossible. And the Dyatlov group's footprints do not clearly show blind terror. They appear to have moved together, organized, downhill. The infrasound theory remains intriguing, but it is difficult to test. Then there are the military theories. And in the Soviet Union of 1959, secrecy was not a small detail. This was the Cold War. The region was vast. Military tests were not always public. Some witnesses later reported strange lights in the sky around that period. Some of the hikers' clothing showed traces of radiation. The investigation was closed quickly. Files were limited, and the official phrase, "unknown compelling force," sounded suspicious to many. From these fragments came theories of rocket debris, weapons testing, secret experiments, parachute mines, pressure waves, or accidental exposure to military activity. These theories try to explain the injuries, the radiation, and the secrecy. But they face serious problems. There is no confirmed evidence that a weapon struck the campsite. The tent was not burned or blasted apart. The trees were not flattened. The bodies did not show injuries typical of an explosion. No military debris was conclusively tied to the deaths. And the radiation, while real in some reports, may not be as mysterious as it sounds. At least some members of the group had connections to work or study environments where radioactive contamination was possible. Radiation testing in the original investigation was limited and has been interpreted in different ways. It remains a strange clue, but not by itself proof of a secret weapon. Still, people keep returning to the military theories for one reason. The Soviet investigation never felt complete. When a government known for secrecy gives a vague answer, suspicion grows in the empty spaces. The less the public is told, the more the imagination supplies, and Dyatlov Pass is full of empty spaces. The hikers' cameras were recovered. Their diaries were recovered. Their final photographs show ordinary expedition scenes. Snow, skis, tired faces, a group still moving forward. There is no photograph of the event, no final explanation, no last message, just absence. That absence allowed the case to become whatever people feared most. For some, it was murder. For others, military secrecy. For others, the power of nature. But the more carefully the evidence is examined, the more the mystery seems to narrow. Not disappear. Narrow. The Mansi attack theory lacks tracks, motive, and evidence. Animal attack does not fit the tent, footprints, or injuries. A fight inside the group does not fit the pattern of movement or the scale of injuries. Supernatural explanations are stories, not evidence. Military theories remain possible in the broadest sense because Cold War secrecy was real. But they have not produced a confirmed mechanism that fits the physical scene better than natural explanations. The strongest modern theories involve snow, wind, cold, and terrain. A slab avalanche, katabatic winds, a failed attempt to shelter in the forest, a rime collapse, hypothermia, paradoxical, undressing survivors taking clothing from the dead, a sequence of rational decisions made under impossible pressure. This may be the most haunting version of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Not that the hikers acted irrationally, but that they may have acted rationally and still had no chance. In 2020, Russian prosecutors reopened and reviewed the case, concluding that an avalanche, poor visibility, and extreme conditions most likely forced the group from the tent and led to their deaths. They described the hikers not as panicked fools, but as people struggling heroically against circumstances they could not overcome. The 2021 slab avalanche research gave that conclusion a stronger scientific foundation. It showed how a rare snow slab event could happen on that slope, how it could be delayed, how it could be small, how it could injure people without leaving the obvious signs of a giant avalanche. And yet, even that research did not explain every controversial detail. The radiation, the missing soft tissue, the exact timing, the exact reason no one made it back, the precise sequence of injuries, the emotional truth of those final hours. Science can model the snow. It can estimate force. It can reconstruct terrain. It can explain how cold kills. But it cannot fully recreate what 9 people saw, heard, and felt inside that tent when they decided that the darkness outside was safer than staying in. That is the part that still grips the world. Imagine the moment. The tent is half buried or shaking violently. Someone is injured. Someone shouts that they have to get out. The entrance is blocked, or too slow, or too dangerous. A knife cuts through canvas. Freezing air rushes in. They crawl into the night. The wind erases the mountain. The tent disappears behind them. Below, the forest is a black line in the snow. They believe they can wait there. They believe they can survive long enough to return. They believe the worst has already happened. But it has only begun. At the cedar tree, a small fire fights against the cold. Branches snap. Hands freeze. 2 bodies fall still. Others take clothing from them, not out of cruelty, but because survival has become a matter of minutes. 3 turn back toward the tent. They can see where salvation should be. Boots, coats, food, a stove. Everything they need is uphill, but the distance is too far. The wind is too strong. The cold is inside them now. One by one, they collapse facing the place they were trying to reach. The last 4 seek shelter in the ravine. Maybe they dig. Maybe they crawl beneath snow. Maybe they think they have found protection. Then the snow gives way, or the cold finishes what the mountain started. By morning, there is no movement left on the pass. Only the tent, the footprints, the dead fire, and the silence. The Dyatlov Pass Incident may never have one perfect answer. The most likely explanation today is not a monster, not a murder, and not a single dramatic event. It is a chain reaction, a dangerous campsite, a fragile snow slab, violent wind, darkness, injuries, bad visibility, hypothermia, a series of decisions that made sense in the moment and became fatal in the next. But the case survives because one question still refuses to die. What exactly happened inside that tent? What did they hear? What did they feel? What made 9 experienced hikers cut through canvas and step into a night where no human body could last for long? Maybe it was snow shifting above them. Maybe it was the roar of wind. Maybe it was the fear of being buried alive. Maybe the truth is not hidden in secret archives or strange lights in the sky, but in the terrifying simplicity of nature at its worst. A mountain does not need to be evil. It does not need to chase you. It does not need to leave footprints. Sometimes, it only needs one slope, one storm, one wrong decision, and a few minutes in the dark. And somewhere on that frozen mountainside, under the name Dyatlov Pass, the final answer may still be there, buried not in conspiracy, but in snow.